Maroon Spirit 954. This is the 11th week of the last fiscal quarter in the year 2019, our 400th year milestone as American Native Blacks, aka Americans who descend from the institution of slavery known as the United States government. It's week 11. Today is December 9th, 2019. Today's Dr. Carter G. Woodson quote from The Miseducation of the Negro states the following: "Our advanced teachers, like most highly educated Negroes, pay little attention to the things about them except when the shoe begins to pinch on one or the other side. Unless they happen to become naked, they never think of the production of cotton or wool. Unless they get hungry, they never give any thought to the output of wheat or corn. Unless their friends lose their jobs, they never inquire about the outlook for coal or steel, or how these things affect the children whom they are trying to teach. In other words, they live in a world, but they are not of it. How can such persons guide the youth without knowing how these things affect the Negro community?" Dr. Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro. Today's Black inventor, Mr. Granville Taylor Woods. I've mentioned him on a previous week. However, I didn't do him proper justice because he has a host of inventions, and I'm going to just cite the rest of those inventions here in week 11. Mr. Granville Taylor Woods invented the steam boiler furnace, federal patent number 299894, June 3rd, 1884. Mr. Granville Taylor Woods also invented the telephone transmitter, patent number 308876, December 2nd, 1884. The app for transmission of messages by electricity, federal patent number 315368, April 7th, 1885. Mr. Granville also invented the relay instrument, federal patent number 364619, June 7th, 1887. The polarized relay, federal patent number 366192, July 5th, 1887. The electromechanical brake, federal patent number 368265, August 16th, 1887. Electromagnetic brake apparatus, federal patent number 371655, October 18th, 1887. Railway telegraphy, federal patent number 373383, November 15th, 1887. Induction telegraph system, federal patent number 373915, November 29th, 1887. Overhead conducting system for electric railway, federal patent number 383844, May 29th, 1888. Electromotive railway system, federal patent number 385034, June 26, 1888. Tunnel construction for electric railway, federal patent number 386282, July 17th, 1888. Galvanic battery, federal patent number 387839, August 14th, 1888. Railway telegraphy, federal patent number 388803, August 28th, 1888. Automatic cutoff switch, federal patent number 395533, January 1st, 1889. Electric railway system, federal patent number 463020, November 10th, 1891. Electric railway conduit, federal patent number 509065, November 21st, 1893. System of electrical distribution, federal patent number 569443, October 13th, 1896. Amusement apparatus, federal patent number 639692, December 19th, 1899. Electric railway, federal patent number 667110, January 29th, 1901. Electric railway system, federal patent number 678086, July 9th, 1901. Regulating and controlling electrical translation devices, federal patent number 681768, September 3rd, 1901. Automatic air brake, federal patent number 701981, June 10th, 1902. So everybody that lives in a city that has public transportation, Chicago, New York, all your cities with major railway, even the railroad that went out west, tip your hat to the American black inventor, Mr. Granville Taylor Woods. Definitions: school, any institution at which instruction is given in a particular discipline. Education, an enlightening experience. American, noun, a native or citizen of the United States. Descendants, one who follows in the bloodline of an ancestor, either lineally or collaterally. Slavery, a situation in which one person has absolute power over the life, fortune, and liberty of another. Treaty, an agreement formally signed, ratified, or adhered to between two nations or sovereigns. Reparations, the act of making an amends for a wrong. Maroon historical points. Point 1. Their black skin made them easy targets to identify, so black became a badge of bondage. Point 2. Were Maroons and black Americans escaping slavery or breaking the law? Point 3. Outlaw slave colonies were called Maroon colonies. Point 4. Maroon leaders were first and foremost military officers. Point 5. Maroons paid a small agricultural tax to be used for common defense. The 12 steps of recovery for the American descendants of slavery. This is a 13-week practical program of action for each American descendant of slavery. Step 1. Learn about the estate or estates your family originated from. 2. Who established that estate? 3. What nation and confederacy had jurisdiction over that area prior to the European? 4. Ask all nonprofit organizations you attend what's your position on reparations. 5. They either support it or they don't. No support, no money. However, if they support it, then immediately children and adults need weekly classes free of charge about steps 1, 2, 3, and field trips to ADOS landmarks in that city, county, and state. 6. Don't support European holidays for the remainder of the year. 7. Avoid spending money with any small business that doesn't hire your people. 8. All businesses need operating cash. Spend money with American black businesses. 9. All other groups rely on our energy and operating cash to survive. Set the trends of making other groups follow our lead and support our clubs, services, products, and entertainment. 10. The U.S. government is bankrupt. The Federal Reserve prints money, i.e. quantitative easing. It also burns money, i.e. quantitative tightening. The U.S. dollar hasn't been backed by gold since Richard Nixon in 1971. The government operates off the full faith of its citizens to pay debt and taxes. American descendants of slavery no longer have faith in the United States government. This is why financial support will be altered, stopped, and redirected. 11. Teach your kids 1 hour a day about their history on this land. Subsection A. Have them learn about a black inventor. B. Have them know about our heroes. C. They should know the European that conquered the estate you live in. D. They should know the nation of people prior to European invasion militarily and culturally. 12. Practicing these steps will educate us on the land we're claiming America and attaches us to the history and laws of the United States government. Every estate American descendants of slavery live in should have steps 1, 2, and 3 advertised via social media, radio, and newspaper. This in 13 weeks, 1 fiscal quarter, will bring us together for our common cause. So the last 2 weeks, I was mentioning the Civil War, which anytime you talk about the Civil War when it comes to American Native Black history and Native American history, you have to talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. So we've went through the Emancipation Proclamation, and we've also got a good understanding how that Civil War started, who was on what teams, what Native American nations sided with the Confederate, why they had to side with the Confederate, because it was a separate government and they forced them into new treaties. All right. And then we got to the end of the Civil War, where the United States government beating the Confederate States of America, then turned around and voided all the treaties that were in place prior to the Civil War. So now the Native Americans had to go into new treaties and lost more land. The reason why I had to throw the Civil War in, that's a vital part of Maroon history, which is AKA American blacks who descend from the institution of slavery, those runaways. It also ties in to the Black American Seminole, which comprised of Black Native Americans from different nations as they were being defeated militarily to come together and form a Seminole nation. So I had to throw the Civil War in because when Andrew Jackson enforced the Indian Removal Act in 1830 and started migrating all of those black Maroons and black Seminoles from what we know as that Florida area, we have to go back to the Adam and Onis Treaty and in order to understand how much land Spain ended up giving to Andrew Jackson during the Seminole Wars. Right? You're talking about Florida, what we know as Georgia. You're talking about Alabama, Mississippi, Texas. All of that was under Spain. So you can pull up on Google the Adam and Onis Treaty and get an idea of the area that we were operating in. So we go west of the Mississippi River. The United States government's military sent those black Americans west of the Mississippi River because they could not defeat them militarily. Once they got the majority of those black Americans that they could not defeat militarily on the other side of the Mississippi River, west of the Mississippi River, that allowed them to have a civil war. See, our history, that Underground Railroad that ran through what we now know as Georgia and ran into what we now know as Florida and Alabama, Mississippi, that Underground Railroad that went south to where those truly free American blacks were, which was the Maroon Nation and that Black Seminole Nation, we are directly linked to the Civil War. How? They had to get us on the other side of the Mississippi for that to even take place. They had to cut off the Underground Railroad that was running to that nation of free black people. So once you moved the majority of us west of the Mississippi River through the Trail of Tears, which now we know that's an American black story. That's a story about the free American blacks that resided in what we now know as Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi. That's our story. We were a part of the Trail of Tears. Once you got the majority of us west of the Mississippi River, now where those slaves gonna run to? So it made it easier in a 10-year period for Abraham Lincoln to emancipate those that were in slavery, those that were incarcerated, those that were locked up. It was easy for him to emancipate them and give them the two options. You already incarcerated, you already in slavery. You can work, you can labor faithfully for reasonable wages, or you can pick up a gun and help the United States government beat the Confederate States of America. But keep in mind, all of this was going on only after they were able to get us off of our land and we went into Mexico. So we were in Mexico for 20 years while the Civil War was popping off. So let's do a quick recap real quick of some of the things that took place while the Maroon Nation and the Seminole Nation were in Mexico. Remember, all of this is military strategic to get us in the Arkansas, Oklahoma area. We couldn't do business with the Native American nations that were already out there, the Apaches, the Comanches. So we ended up going into Mexico. So to recap, the emancipation was also imposed. Well, we know that during the Civil War. Most Native Americans allied with the Confederacy. The death of the Confederacy gave the United States government a new opportunity to impose its will on Native Americans. Existing treaties were scrapped. Large portions of land were taken from the nations by the United States government. Plains Nation, Shawnees, and Delawares received it in return. The U.S. government and European citizens didn't allow slaves and didn't need slave hunters. Choctaws and Chickasaws resisted up until the 1890s. So you want to hold on to those two nations, the Choctaws and the Chickasaws. Those were the two worst nations when it came to enslaving American blacks on this land. That's going to tie in to another treaty, the 1866 Indian Treaty, which is where you hear black people talk about 40 acres and a mule. That language comes out of the 1866 Indian Treaty. But guess who was supposed to give us the 40 acres and a mule? It was supposed to be the same two nations of Native Americans that were the harshest on black Americans with slavery, the Choctaws and the Chickasaws. So the United States government basically put their responsibility on the Choctaws and the Chickasaws. Y'all the ones supposed to give them 40 acres and a mule. So it's a lot of articles to that 1866 Indian Treaty. It's really too long to do a video on it because it's like 42 articles to it. But when you get a chance, that 40 acre and a mule language is in like I think it's either in Article 1 or Article 2 of that treaty. And you'll see right there, the Choctaw and the Chickasaws, the two worst nations when it came to enslaving people outside of the European, they were the ones charged with doing right by black Americans. Within each nation, Native American blacks faced years of legal challenges and political protests to win citizenship rights, land, schooling, and equality of opportunity. Sound familiar? Sound like we still going through that in 2019. American blacks that fought in the Civil War for the Union were denied full membership among the Choctaws and Chickasaws upon return. There go those two nations again. American blacks built their own schools, hired and paid their own teachers. They converted homes and churches into schools. If you have to make a sacrifice, fill schools up to educate your own people. Many American blacks entered Native American nations after the Civil War. Many American blacks married and made their living in a society not so violent with race and skin color. All right, so we know that the Civil War ended in 1865. All right, so while the Civil War ended, you got those two nations of people that the United States government couldn't beat. They're in Mexico. The majority of those two nations are now in Mexico. So while the Civil War was popping off, we're in Mexico. We went west on the Trail of Tears, crossed over the Mississippi River, went into Arkansas, Oklahoma, and then we eventually went into Mexico. We stayed there for about 20 years. In that 20-year period, the Civil War popping off, Emancipation Proclamation took place, and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment has taken place. So now we're in 1870. 1870, July 4th, led by Snake Warrior, Sub-Chief to John Horse, the U.S. Army sent Captain Frank Perry to Mexico to negotiate with the Black Maroon Nation and Seminole Nation. So in 1870, the United States government is going to send this captain down there to negotiate with Snake Warrior. In return for Seminole young men serving as scouts for the Army, Seminoles would be provided food, necessities, and good farming land. So the deal for the Seminole Nation and that Maroon Nation of people to come out of Mexico, they had to give up their young men to the United States Army in return for food, necessities, and good farming land. 1870, what happened to make Maroons and the Seminole Nation come to an agreement with the United States government? The U.S. Army hired our young men as scouts because they couldn't defeat us in a century of warfare. So the terms for the Maroon Nation and the Black Seminole Nation, the terms to come out of Mexico by Captain Frank Perry was, give us your young men, give us your young warlords. Because we already know based on military records that we never beat you. Maroons were returning to a land that enslaved their ancestors. So 20 years later, they're coming back into the same land where they had their descendants or their ancestors escaping from the legal construct of slavery. So the Seminole Nation and the Maroon Nation negotiated its entrance into now the U.S. by formal treaty. Now remember, no treaty was ever signed at the end of the Third Seminole War. So the Black Maroon Nation and the Black Seminole Nation, those Black Americans that went west, crossed the Mississippi River into Arkansas and into Oklahoma, there was no treaty that ended that Third Seminole War. Going into Mexico and then 20 years later coming out of Mexico, there was a treaty for those two nations to come back in to North America, or what we want to say, the United States government's legal construct. The Seminole Nation and Maroon Nations arrived intact under Chief John Horse. So this took place under Chief John Horse. Major Zenas A. Bliss sent Captain Perry to Mexico to contract the Seminole Nation Indian Scouts according to European military records. Major Zenas A. Bliss sent Captain Perry to Mexico to contract the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts according to European military records. So Captain Perry got down there because of Major Zenas Bliss. Texas didn't welcome the Seminole and Maroon Nation. All right, so coming out of Mexico, coming through Texas, those Texans, they didn't care for us. American blacks were recently slaves, and Europeans regretted that had changed. All right, so right after this Civil War, it's a lot of tension. You got a lot of Europeans that felt like peonage is where we're supposed to be. So after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, you got a lot of Europeans on foreign land, which is North America. They still didn't want to act right. They still didn't want to recognize that the legislative branch of the United States government has stood behind those American descendants of slavery. The judicial branch didn't, but the legislative branch did through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Discharged Confederate Europeans, furious about defeat and the emancipation of American blacks, were still armed and dangerous. So even though the Civil War ended, it was still a war on Europeans and black Native Americans. As desert fighters, Seminoles and Maroons were one of the finest soldiers the U.S. Army had ever seen. John L. Bullis was charged with leading the Seminole Nation and Maroon Nation from New York. All right, so here we got another European military officer. John L. Bullis was the one leading the Seminole Nation once they came out of Mexico, and the Maroon Nation. And he was originally from New York. Sergeant John Ward, trumpeter, Isaac Payne, private, Pompey Factor, all received Congressional Medals of Honor. So those former military or current military people, you know what a Congressional Medal of Honor, how high of an esteem of an award that is. You got 3 American blacks from the Seminole Nation and the Maroon Nation that garnished that honor. The Maroon Seminole Nation never won land or peace. So we know why the Maroon Nation never got any land or peace, because it was pencil assassination. We were never included in the first 2 treaties under the first 2 Seminole Wars. They bunched us in with the Seminole Nation. Even though we were doing a lot of the negotiating, we know now, based off of this 13-week fiscal video series, the Seminoles weren't learning from their lesson in contracting with the European. However, the Seminole Nation and the Maroon Nation never won land or peace. Chief John Horse led delegations to military authorities, handed in petitions, and asked for adherence to treaties. All right, so remember, they had to sign a treaty coming out of Mexico. So Chief John Horse is going through the proper delegations to military authorities or to their warlords saying, hey, look, I mean, we went into agreement on this. What's up? Chief John Horse gathered letters of support from Lieutenant Bullis, Major Bliss, General Auger, Commander, Department of Texas. None worked. So you signed a treaty with the Seminole and the Maroon Nation coming out of Mexico, coming back into North America under the legal construct of the United States government, but nothing worked as far as adhering to this treaty. The treaty was never found. You see what they did? The Third Seminole War never ended via treaty. you send hundreds of thousands of black Americans west of the Mississippi River, burning everything that they're leaving behind, all artifacts, all accounting records, all belief system records, religious records, anything of value, you burned it behind them, walking them with bayonet to their back, knife attached to the end of an assault rifle is a bayonet. You walk them out into Oklahoma and Arkansas. They then run down into Mexico. You send one of your warlords, a captain, to go down there and negotiate a treaty with them coming back in, because you want the young black Native Americans from the Seminole Nation and the Maroon Nation in your army. So you come to terms into an agreement, and then you start not honoring that agreement about the land and the other two terms that were stipulated that I previously mentioned. And then all of a sudden you say, oops, we don't have a treaty. The War Department had no land to offer. The Department of Interior claimed they were not entitled to Native American lands. The Army then cut Seminole rations. Food and necessities for 50 men were now needed for 300 men, women, and children. So once you did the disappearing act with that treaty, all of a sudden, all your different entities start saying no land is available. You're not entitled to any land. And we're going to cut back on your rations and starve you out. This proud nation was reduced to stealing food, cattle, and taking servant jobs from Europeans. That's how you break a group of people and put them in the basement in a society. That sounds very similar to 2019. If you cut off rations, which is what our group of people are talking about in 2019. We're talking about tangibles. We're talking about reparations, repairing the damage that was done by the United States government. When you don't want to recognize that, or you're not specifically allocating resources to a particular group of people, you're bunching us in under the word minority with European women and European gays and immigrants from all around the world and handicapped people, right? You're bunching us in. You're not itemizing and specifically making sure that this particular group gets resources. What you're doing is you're starving us out. And what has to happen in return when you starve a group of people out or cut rations or redirect rations on purposely so that they can't really benefit from it? They're going to start stealing food, stealing cattle, and then you got to take servant jobs from Europeans. You got to labor faithfully for a reasonable wage. I'm going to keep going back to that Emancipation Proclamation, because once you understand what Lincoln did, you can see that the game has not changed for the American black. Most American blacks in today's society have become so conditioned with labor that our group brags on the fact that they have a job. We brag on laboring faithfully for a reasonable wage. We don't brag on ownership, but we brag on labor. Why? It was embedded in us since 1861 through the Emancipation Proclamation. The Seminole Nation and the Maroon Nation had the U.S. government not honoring a treaty. Local Europeans wanted their lands, and outlaw Europeans wanted them dead. And the Army cut rations. So you basically brought this nation of people out of Mexico the same way that Abraham Lincoln used those black American slaves through the Emancipation Proclamation as bodies to fight for the Union. Now they brought that same concept back to the Black American Seminole Nation and the Black Maroon Nation and said, we want your young warriors to be in our army because, again, we want bodies and we know how skillful fighters you guys are. So we're going to use you as fodder in war to get our objective done. But then when it's time to honor what we said that we were going to honor in the agreement can't be found. So by now the Seminole Nation is becoming divided. Right now the nation is starting to fall apart because local Europeans want their land, outlaw Europeans want them dead, and the American military is cutting rations. So now the nation is starting, it's almost like every man for himself, which is where American blacks are today in 2019. By 1882, Bullis and the Seminole Nation in 11 years did 26 expeditions, 12 major engagements. They didn't lose one man in battle and no one was seriously wounded. That's the war record of the American Black Seminole and the American Black Maroon that came out of Mexico and fought under Bullis from New York. Bullis gets credit as the greatest Indian fighter in the history of the United States Army. So here we have Bullis gets all the credit, but it was the Black American Seminole and the Black American Maroon from the Maroon Nation that was doing all the fighting, never got wounded, never lost one soldier in over 26 expeditions in an 11-year time frame and 12 major engagements. But the European gets all the credit as the greatest Indian fighter. You see that? The Seminole Nation didn't share in Bullis' story that they clearly earned. In 1882, Chief John Horse rode into Mexico, never to be seen again. Quitting while you're ahead is not the same as quitting. So Chief John Horse basically just said, I'm through with it. I'm through with it. Your word ain't nothing. Your word don't mean nothing. American was Chief John Horse's name. That's the cherry on top. The horse that man rode on, the horse that Black American, that native Black American rode on, that chief, that businessman, that military commander, the horse name was American. Private Pompey Factor, who saved Bullis' life and received the Medal of Honor, the Army never gave him a pension. Does that sound familiar? Now, this is back in 1882. There are stories of that in World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War. So this thing goes on and on. So when you talk about repairing damage that was done, what's worse, we can go, I'm sorry, I can't skip over the biggest one, the Civil War with the Emancipation Proclamation. The idea that you would, quote unquote, liberate a slave to allow them to pick up a gun, but never really give them freedom so that they could become lords of their domains and create their own reality. No, I'll give you a gun and then you can labor faithfully for reasonable wages. And if you do kill on my behalf in my military, I'll have you do my dirty work and then I won't even compensate you in your old age so that you can at least live the rest of your life with some financial freedom or some financial peace. Pompey Factor in his late 70s asked a Texas lawyer to plead his case before the Army. The Army claimed it had no record of service, but he got a Congressional Medal of Honor, but he's got no record of service. 1928, Pompey Factor died in Brackettville, Texas. That's another American black hero. Pompey Factor died 1928 in Brackettville, Texas, with no pension and no military record that he ever fought for the United States Army, but he got a Congressional Medal of Honor. The Seminole Nation and Maroon Nation are on both sides of the Rio Grande, with their historic valor unrecognized. So we're a dirty little secret in Mexico. Oh yeah, that Mexican Constitution that got constructed, the Black Seminole Nation and the Black Maroon Nation, we need credit for that. All the people in Mexico, you forgot that little part of your history, right? It was that Seminole Nation and Maroon Nation, that group of nations of Black Americans, Black Native Americans, that knew how to run stuff on the highest level, which is a nation, coming out that Florida area, that went into Mexico, helped you get your constitution together. There's no historic monuments. And even on this land, hugely unrecognized is the Maroon Nation and the Seminole Nation. Never heard of the Seminole Wars. Went to school in Florida. I think that's very interesting that you can go through school in the state of Florida, in the state of Georgia, in the state of Alabama, Mississippi, and never know or learn about your people's history. There are no monuments to the Seminole Nation. Maroons and Seminoles got no rest while alive. When you look at it, really did over 100 years worth of wars. In the end, having to relocate from your original land and territory to the Midwest, Arkansas, Oklahoma, then into Mexico. Then you come back under the United States government after it had its Civil War, only to get starved out with rations, go into a treaty with them that they can't seem to find or put their hand on. And then those same young Black American Seminoles and Black American Maroons that joined that military, which was part of the terms of agreement to leave Mexico and come back under the United States government. Oh, no, we don't have any pensions for you. What other group fought before 1776? Over 100 years, from Florida marshlands to Texas deserts, for liberty and justice in America? That's a question. What other group fought before 1776, over 100 years, from Florida marshes to Texas deserts, for liberty and justice in America? We are the greatest American story. And that's not over exaggerating. If your ancestry goes back to Georgia or Florida, or what we now know as Georgia or Florida, that's not over exaggerating. That is military record. Name another group of people who fought over 100 years worth of wars. From Florida all the way to Texas. Sent on a Trail of Tears, the whole nine. We were never told that we or that is a part of our history. So we got a serious problem with highly schooled American blacks who focus on history, and this is not widely known amongst our people because it puts all the pieces of the puzzle together. It's three sides to a coin. It's heads, it's tails, and it's the edge. The heads is what we've always learned in school. Benjamin Franklin, Abraham Lincoln, right? The tails is slavery, the plantation, the Willie Lynch letter, and all these different books hundreds of books about the mental damage that was done to those that were locked up in concentration camps, or i.e. plantations, or i.e. doing life sentences. But then the edge of the coin is the Underground Railroad that went south into Florida, where you had two nations of black Americans that the European and their military could not defeat. And it was only through constant cheating legally, coupled with relocation, coupled with smallpox, coupled with burning all history, then coming to terms to have them come out of Mexico to help them. The same people they couldn't beat. Now you need them same black Native Americans to help you in your army. You turn around, get the help you need to help you deal with your own people who are outlaws in the Texas desert area. We go on several expeditions for over 11 years, lose not one Native black American in any conflict with the European out there in the desert of Texas and in Mexico under Bullis, Lieutenant Bullis, only to be starved out with rations, never given any land, forced to labor faithfully for reasonable wages, and to steal food and cattle in order to survive. Liberty and Justice in America, 1873, December. Chief John Horse's plea is on file in the National Archives. 1873, December, Chief John Horse's plea is on file in the National Archives. That's before he quits while he's ahead and rides off on American, his horse, into Mexico. So what we can see as we get ready to close out this year, 2019, in the 11th fiscal week, we can clearly see that it's up to us to be honest and truthful amongst ourselves, because it's not to their benefit to tell us about the energy and the people from the South. See, the story has always been kind of told in bits and pieces when you stop and think about it. We heard about the burning of the books, but that was on another landmass by Napoleon. That's what we were taught. We weren't schooled on the fact that they did a scorched earth practice right in Florida. We were never taught that. Right in Florida is where we held it down. We had our own government, we had our own operation, and we were free. European law was foreign to us. Nowadays, all we know is European law. It's foreign to us to come up with our own constitution. Less than 200 years later. You talk about 1882 is when John Horse rode off into Mexico. So 1982, that's 100 years. And then 92, 02, 012, almost 140 years later, that same group of black Native Americans can't even wrap their mind around their own government, their own nation, with their own constitution, doing contracts or business on the highest level as a group on planet Earth, which is the form of a treaty. We can't wrap our mind around that. What we want is a bill or an act or an amendment to the Constitution. We don't know. That's why we can't wrap our mind around organizing at the highest level as a group. Because our history on this land has been flipped upside down, omitted, erased. And if it wasn't for certain people doing the homework to put certain information out there, these videos wouldn't even be possible. We were always told, and this is within the American Black or American descendants of slavery community or Native Black Americans, we were always told that the North American Native Black always looked down on the Southern Native American Black. The truth is, it's not bragging, but it's the truth. The truth is, the realest Native American Blacks come from the South. Point blank, period. And had our own nation and our own government to run to. So yeah, the Underground Railroad went to Michigan and went up north. All of that's fine and good. But the truth of the matter is, if you live in North America under the United States government and you're a Native American Black, the lie is that the Northern Native American Black is more on the ball than the Southern Native American Black. But based on the information that I've cited to for 11 weeks now, we know that that's a lie. And that's not downing our Northern Native American Black brother. It is what it is. Don't tell me about assimilating into the Europeans' legal construct called the government when we had our own government, our own military, and we went to war with the European for over 100 years, and the last war never ended in a treaty. They never defeated us. We just came to legal terms in order to relocate, only to get finessed. So yeah, I hope that anybody who listens to these videos, I hope if it doesn't inspire you, at least let it motivate you that we have an untapped source of energy in us, that we are aware of it, but we don't know how to manifest it and tap into it and make it come alive for us. So the same way that I operate my operation from a business standpoint, you project out 90 days, and then you come back to the present. You go to the future, you go 90 days into the future, you chart it out, and then you come back to the present, and then you do the work in order to get up to that 13-week milestone or that 90-day milestone. There's a lot of different positive principles or concepts that can be taken out of this video series, but one of them is discipline and consistency. That in itself separates the men from the boys. Discipline, consistency, and not being afraid to look at yourself, which is what we call an inventory. And that's what has to happen amongst our group on a group level. The same principle applies to the group. We have to get in the habit of being disciplined, consistent, and looking at ourselves. And if we could get disciplined with where we spend our money, that's the first way that you get your house in order, your personal house in order, or your business in order. You don't ramp up. You don't spend more money to make more money. The first thing you do is stop all money that you can going out the back door. Look at what you're spending it on. Look at what you're making. Look at what your profit margin is. How much operating cash do I have versus my profit? Because you can't spend profit. With that being said, it's the 11th fiscal week. We got 2 big European holidays coming up. We got Christmas and we got New Year's. Hopefully you end this 400-year milestone, even if it hurts you to your stomach or to your core, to switch it up. It's time to stop the madness. Shout out to Dr. William Katz, Dr. Claude Anderson, Dr. Umar Johnson, Professor Black Truth, Black Authority, Tone Talks, Yvette Carnell, Jordan Maxwell, Gene Keating, Taj Tariq Bey, Yusufel, those, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, those are just some of the people that Dr. Joseph Ben Yakut, and there's a lot of different people, Dr. John Henry Clark, there's a lot of people that you can tap into to get information from. Out of all of those people that I mentioned, Dr. William Katz, a European, through his writings and through his literature, he talks more about the positive side of our history than any other information that I've ever read. Dr. William Katz. With that being said, we are the gods.